Welcome back to 2 Minutes to Midnight, where we unravel the pressing environmental challenges and potential pathways to sustainability. I'm Ashish, and today we are diving into India's complex relationship between its ecology and economy.
And I'm Jyoti. Together, we'll explore the consequences of industrial growth, climate risks, and the way forward for a sustainable future. With topics ranging from threats and impacts to lessons from global leaders, this episode promises a deep dive into solutions India urgently needs. Let's start with Ashish giving us the broader picture, the effect of nature's role in India's economy.
Thanks, Devjyoti. To understand India's ecological challenges, we first need to recognize how deeply intertwined nature is with our economy. More than 55% of our GDP relies on nature, either directly or indirectly. Think of agriculture, forestry, fisheries, or industries like tourism and energy, which thrive on natural ecosystems. But here's the problem. Historically, we have only seen nature as a resource. We extract timber for construction, mine coal for energy, and cultivate food for consumption. What we have ignored is nature's role as a service provider. Services like oxygen generation, water regulation, soil restoration, and climate stabilization aren't just abstract concepts, they are the backbone of our survival. Livelihoods have an interdependent relationship with natural assets such as land, energy, coal, waste, water, air, etc. In many cases, they require the use of these assets, and on other hand, protecting and enhancing these assets can increase the earning potential for livelihoods. Also, a wide range of scholarship recognizes this to be a problem that is inherent to the capitalist mode of production. This is because the capitalist mode of production does not view the system holistically through a dialectical lens. This it doesn't observe the interdependence between the production and the nature, and that is why it leads to this problem.
You've mentioned nature being seen as a resource in addition to being a service provider. Do you think climate risks have a tangible impact on the economy at large?
Definitely, like the climate risks are now an economy-wide concern. Extreme weather can damage ports, airports, and other infrastructure, which can result in supply chain disruptions. These spill over into the wider economy, causing insurance like costs for physical damage, food price shocks, and upsetting manufacturing and employment targets as well.
That's concerning, Ashish. It's like we've built an economic house, but we've forgotten to set base for the foundation.
Right, and like this oversight is very costly. Rural livelihoods in particular are inseparable from natural assets like water, soil, air, etc. And these aren't just like resources for them; they are lifelines. And when these lifelines are disrupted, it isn't just the nature that gets affected. These entire communities lose their economy.
That leads us to the next part of the puzzle, the threats to these lifelines. Allow me to take it from there. Now, the threats to India's ecology are vast and multifaceted. Industrialization, while propelling economic growth, has created significant environmental challenges. A lot of it boils down to over extraction and unsustainable practices. Take water, for example. India has the highest rate of groundwater overuse in the world. In many areas, aquifers are drying up faster than they can recharge, leading to plummeting water tables.
That is alarming. And like, what about coal and other resources?
Right. Coal, over half of India's energy comes from it, yet reserves are depleting rapidly. According to Coal India, which handles 80% of India's production, our usable coal reserves are not as large as we thought. At current rates of growth, these are likely to last about 80 years, and at projected rates of growth, they'll finish in just about 3 to 4 decades. In FY 2022, the demand for coal was 890 million tons, while domestic supplies added up to approximately 777 million tons. The rest, around 210 million tons, was imported mainly from Indonesia, Australia, and South Africa.
Okay, so like we are depleting these resources faster than we can replace them, right?
Exactly. And the consequences, they don't just stop there. Nearly 30% of the country's landmass is experiencing minor soil erosion, while a critical 3% faces catastrophic topsoil loss, according to a recent study done by two members of IIT Delhi. India also loses 15.35 tons of soil per hectare annually, and which reduces crop productivity and causes a loss of 13.4 million tons of rain-fed crops. Meanwhile, our biodiversity is also under siege. 10 and 20% of our flora and fauna, respectively, are already classified as threatened species. In fact, if global temperatures rise by 2 degrees Celsius, then we could just lose 15 to 20% of our biodiversity period. In fact, many of the country's numerous sacred groves or other community conserved areas, which are protected traditionally by rural communities, who might as well add, depend on these areas for both economic sustenance as well as subsistence requirements, have come under threat because of the onslaught of economic growth masquerading as unsustainable development.
That is very concerning. And what about water resources?
Right, chronic water shortages are affecting even more regions of the country. Even metro cities like Chennai and Bangalore are not exempt from this issue. India has the highest volume of annual groundwater overuse in the world. And according to the Ministry of Jal Shakti, the threshold for per capita water availability in India is 1700 cubic meters per year for water stress and 1000 cubic meters per year for water scarcity. Now, the average annual per capita water availability for the year 2021 has been assessed as 1486 cubic meters, and for 2031 as 1367 cubic meters respectively, which suggests that availability is closer to water scarcity levels. Now, despite the impressive growth of several sectors in India, the share of the country's budget going directly into environmental work or regulation has remained extremely low. The Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change was allocated 3,330.37 crores, which represents a minor increase of approximately 91 crores, but still accounts for less than 0.07% of the total budget. Things are changing though, as the 24 budget also allocated rupees 19,100 crores to the Ministry of New and Renewable Energy, which was a 143% increase from the revised estimate of 2023 and 2024.
That is good to know. And let us now talk about the impact of these threats on livelihood, etc. So, the impact of environmental degradation is both immediate and long term. At its core, the climate change doesn't just harm the environment; it disrupts the economy, livelihoods, and social stability. For instance, extreme weather events like droughts and floods are becoming more frequent and also intense. These disasters don't just destroy crops, they destabilize supply chains, raise food prices, and derail the employment targets.
And rural communities who are the custodians of these places, they bear the brunt of this, right?
Absolutely, rural areas are often the first to feel the pinch. Biodiversity laws, for instance, make agriculture more vulnerable. A decline in pollinators like bees and butterflies affect crop yields, while monoculture farming increases the risk of pest outbreaks and diseases. So it's a domino effect. One crisis sets off another. And also, if we continue to go down this path, the next few decades could bring mass displacement, desertification, and widespread food and water scarcity.
Mass displacement. This also means that potentially there might be flashpoints, like the stakeholders, the custodian of the forests, the rural communities, and government bodies can be embroiled in arguments, perhaps.
Indeed, indeed. This has been the case, and the recent Hasadeo Arane forest controversy is a case at hand. Insecurities of the tribals of this region encompasses threats of severe environmental degradation, as the Hasadeo forest is often claimed to be the lungs of the nation, as well as the loss of their way of living. The increased human animal conflict due to felling of trees and the loss of trees which are pioneers to these tribes themselves have significantly affected the tribes like Goans, Orangs, etc. And it also is resembled in the media that and also songs that these tribals produce. One famous song, one is Gaon Choda Nahi. It also reflects the tribal insecurity of how rapid commercialization of the land in the tribal areas are affecting these people. But I think it's not all doom and gloom. There is a way forward to this, and I think Tejuti, here is where I think your analysis and solutions should come.
Right. Thanks, Ashish. Now let's break this down. First, India needs to rethink its development model. We must move away from carbon-centric economics and what embrace what in academia is known as an integrated ecology economy approach. This means that we recognize environmental restoration as an economic opportunity and not just a moral obligation to offset the harms caused to the environment.
Right, and how do we like get there?
Now, achieving India's emission targets for limiting global temperature rise to 1.5 or 2 degrees could increase net income up to 25 times in the coming decades by reducing climate related damages and minimizing losses in nature dependent sectors like agriculture and forestry. Now, under its COP26 goals, India aims to develop 50% of its power capacity from non fossil sources, cut carbon emissions by 1 billion tons, reduce carbon intensity by 45%, and establish 500 gigawatts of non-fossil fuel capacity by 2030. The 5-point Punch Up Mrit Action Plan reflects India's commitment to net zero emissions by 2070, necessitating an obvious shift towards renewable energy.
Okay, and like has the government taken any targeted long-term steps for this?
Yes, there have been developments. India's updated its National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan during COP26, aligning with the Kunming-Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework. With 23 targets, the plan focuses on halting biodiversity loss, requiring an average annual investment of 81,664 crores across 23 government departments from 2024 to 2030. Agroforestry is a key focus, which is capable of boosting farmer yields by 64%, while also enhancing soil nutrients, stabilizing water tables, and increasing biodiversity. Then we have the National Water Mission, which focuses on conserving water, minimizing wastage, and ensuring equitable distribution. The Atal Bhujal Yojana emphasizes groundwater management, covering 37% of blocks which have been described as critical. But this is not all. We need investments in our rural communities for forest restoration, coupled with agroforestry, coupled with sustainable fisheries and horticulture, organic and low carbon handicrafts, things like recycling and upcycling industries, creation of green jobs through renewable energy, and energy efficient green infrastructure. India should also consider upgrading existing infrastructure to reduce energy efficiencies and the environmental damage caused by these assets as they degrade over time.
You mentioned about certain policies. Can you delve more into that?
Right. Take India's agroforestry policy from 2014. It was a great idea, but implementation has been shoddy to say the least. A 30% increase in agroforestry by 2050 could sequester 13.6 petagrams of CO2 equivalent, which exceeds India's projected 2050 emissions, which is 11.46 pg CO2 equivalent. By contrast, if we go business as usual, if we only go by status quo, then we would only sequester 10.5 pg CO2 equivalent, which would mean that we are falling short of emission targets. Also, strengthening community level systems like joint forest management committees, as well as fulfilling its international obligations like the Paris Agreement commitment to restore 33% of forests are essential. Now, this year, India recently advanced ocean conservation by signing the Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdiction Agreement on September in 2024. This treaty aims to protect marine life in international waters. Finally, in essence, India can no longer afford a climate policy which is isolated and which only takes care of it itself. It needs to take into consideration global organizations, global responses to climate change, and it can also not have a policy that places business interests over environmental concerns, which is a criticism that was levied against the environmental impact assessment notification in 2020, if you remember. In conclusion, the method of sequencing and financing the transition in India theoretically might look like first, the widespread adoption of transitional technologies, for example, green buildings, bioenergy or biomass, shifts to alternative greener fuel and so on, which have a horizon of less than 5 years. this can be rapidly adapted to an Indian business context as well. Secondly, investing in foundational technologies that have a 5 to 10-year horizon, where a decade of investing in green technologies is required. For example, in energy storage or battery technologies, the next generation of efficient solar-based technologies, as well as gasification technologies from moving from solid to gaseous fuels. Now, this will require an innovative approach for joint research with the private sector, with academia, and with entities abroad. Finally, third, the idea is to develop breakthrough technologies. For example, considering green hydrogen or greenhouse gas removal, where the risk guarantees are required to trigger large scale investments from innovators as well as from industry stakeholders.
I think that is a grand vision. And also, we have examples from a neighboring country, China. And so let's look at how they actually functioned and how they performed their task and eventually became a global leader in this space. So, China's story is instructive. In the late 90s, China recognized the economic potential of green technology. It began investing heavily in energy research and manufacturing, eventually becoming a global leader in this particular space.
And what was their approach?
So the approach was very strategic. The rapid industrialization, urbanization, and creation of numerous development zones that happened after liberalization in China was contained by China through large-scale pollution programs like the 33211, which targeted key rivers, lakes, and industrial pollutants, and introduced binding energy conservation and emission reduction targets. Further, China categorized its industries into the red, yellow, and the green to prioritize investments. Renewable energy was classified as green under the green head, and the subnational governments competed to attract green jobs, which boosted their local GDP while also addressing the pollution problem.
Yeah, I've read about their electric buses. Do they not dominate the market?
They do 60% of the global market to be precise. Early investment in electric buses gave China a significant advantage head start, and this wasn't just about the technology that was there. It was also about anticipating crisis like the urban air pollution that came into picture later on, and also responding proactively to these problems.
Right. So it's about long-term vision and then government policy alignment across different areas, right?
Exactly. China's clean energy push wasn't an isolated effort. It was part of the broader industrial policy that prioritized green growth. The concept of ecological civilization became central to their planning, emphasizing harmony between development and nature. So, twofold approach of stringency in the execution of policies and transparency in through mechanisms like environmental information disclosure have assisted this shift. And so this is something that India can also take lesson from, because the problem in Indian scenario has always been the lack of effective implementation of the policies, which might be great, but there is an effective lack of to get the desired outcome.
Yeah, essentially the two of them need to be reconciled in order for it to make maximum impact. Now, concluding, where does this leave us? First, we need to phase out carbon-intensive practices and phase in sustainable alternatives. And this transition must be strategic in nature. We start with short-term wins like bioenergy, green building, and then invest in medium-term solutions like solar energy and energy storage. Finally, we can focus on long-term breakthroughs and innovation, right?
And what beyond technology? What apart from that?
Right. Obviously, innovation and investment in technologies is just half the battle won. Beyond technology, it's essentially about community resilience. We need to empower rural communities through decentralized governments, through sustainable agriculture and green jobs. And government policies must prioritize ecological restoration alongside economic growth.
And we as citizens have a role here too, I think. Whether it is supporting sustainable practices or advocating for stronger policies or making eco-conscious choices, every action counts. So this brings us to the end of today's episode. If there is one takeaway, it is this: that balancing ecology and economy isn't just possible, it is essential. The stakes are high, but the opportunities are also immense.
That's right, Ashish. That was Ashish, and this is Devjyoti. Thanks for tuning in to 2 Minutes to Midnight. And don't forget to subscribe, share, and stay engaged. Together, we hope that this conversation contributes to shaping a sustainable future. Thank you.